emerge from coronavirus, we need to make our towns a safe place to visit. We need to get them buzzing with activity again. That's why today I've been pleased to visit Mansfield and hear from shoppers and retailers their ideas about how to make their town a safe place. Their views have been crucial as I work hard to develop my police and crime plan, which will come out in the autumn. The plan will be unapologetically tough on crime and antisocial behaviour. And it will leave no stone unturned when it comes to our fight on petty crime and vandalism in our town centres. I will work hard on a range of measures to make it difficult for those who seek to cause issues. And I will continue to work hard to push for more officers on the streets as we continue to make Mansfield safe.
Good evening everyone, welcome to the Nottinghamshire Police and Crime Commissioners Have Your Say event for Mansfield. Caroline Henry, as I'm sure you'll be aware, was elected your Police and Crime Commissioner in May this year and is currently compiling her police and crime plan. You'll hear more about this shortly, but before we do, I'd like to say that this event really is all about you at home. It's your opportunity to ask the Commissioner your questions and have your say on improving policing and tackling crime in Mansfield. So please do get involved online. In terms of the format of the session, I'll shortly hand over to the Commissioner, who will give her opening address before we open the chat function on our social media stream. So please do submit your questions there. In terms of the questions, the Member of Parliament for Mansfield, Ben Bradley, will be asking your questions to the Commissioner, and we're grateful that he's been able to join us this evening. We'll also be hearing from your Neighbourhood Inspector, Inspector Nick Butler, and Chief Inspector Stephen O'Neill, who will be talking a little about the operational policing priorities for Mansfield and the process for setting them. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to your Police and Crime Commissioner, Caroline Henry.
Thanks so much, Alessandra. Good evening. More visible policing, and it was quick on time to put victims and residents at the heart of our policing policy. In taking office, I reduced the issue of police and crime plan in Nottinghamshire. Now this has been a step to the direction for policing in Nottinghamshire for the next 4 years. My plan will be based on 3 simple priorities: preventing, responding, first and foremost, I want to prevent crime from happening in the first place. I want to spend more time and resources in dealing with the causes rather than the consequences of crime. I've already invested in a range of crime prevention initiatives that are enabling us to do that, including the Safer Streets programme in Mansfield, which is tackling street crime, burglary, the investment of CCTV, extra police, council patrols, and improved security in vulnerable properties. I'm also looking to invest in custody schemes to help divert more young people away from crime, improve referrals to treatment outcomes for those with substance misuse, and also do a lot more work in schools to re-engage with vulnerable young people. Now, my second priority is that we're really effective in our response to crime and the issues of greatest concern in our communities. And this is where I really need your help. I want to hear from you about your priorities for the police in Nottinghamshire. And I want to know what we can do better. And I can promise you, in developing my plan, I'll be looking to increase police officer numbers in Nottinghamshire, improve how visible and how accessible they are to you. I'll also be working with the police and other partners to ensure we're making the best use of our tools and powers so that you can see real and tangible difference in the response to the areas of your greatest concerns.
Now, my third and final priority is to better support victims and commuters to be safe, and really importantly, to feel safe. We've got some excellent victim support services in Nottinghamshire, particularly those supporting those victims of domestic and sexual abuse. But I want them to be even better. I also want to ensure that all residents have the confidence to report crime, safe in the knowledge that action will be taken. I'm looking at a range of options to achieve this, but closer working with the criminal justice system is absolutely key. I want to ensure that my plan helps to deliver swifter justice for victims and brings more offenders to account. So, these are my provisional priorities for Nottinghamshire based on the information I've received to date and the thousands of conversations I've had with local residents, including my many trips to Mansfield. But I want to hear your views this evening. I want to know whether you feel these priorities are the right priorities for Nottinghamshire. And I want to hear about the crime and community safety issues that are affecting you in Mansfield. And I can assure you that the feedback you provide today will be used to shape my plan. So I encourage you, please take the opportunity to tell me what you think and what you want to see for crime and policing in your area. Thank you.
So now we're going to hand over to Ben Bradley, who's going to kickstart the questions this evening.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Henry. Thank you for your time this evening and for laying that out for us so clearly. Welcome, Chief Inspector Stephen O'Neill and Inspector Nick Butler. I've always had excellent relationships and support from the police in Mansfield. I'm really grateful for all the work that they do, including with my office, as you can imagine. An awful lot that comes across my desk in terms of casework in Mansfield is crime related, whether that's antisocial behaviour in our own communities and neighbourhoods, whether it's drug-related issues, county lines, traffic offences and speeding, more often than not, things that are really important and affect people's everyday lives. So I know that people will be looking forward to getting their voice heard this evening, to asking those questions, and will no doubt dip into this debate and this discussion later on in the week as it's available on social media too. It's been really good to see since Caroline, Commissioner Henry was elected in May, increased support and funding for Mansfield. She promised to promote our towns and get to work in the places that most needed it. I clearly see Mansfield as a major priority, and she has too, including Safer Streets funding that has come our way and additional police officers. So really welcome that support. We've got limited time tonight, so it'd be good to get onto people's questions. I'm going to do some brazen advertising while I have a sip of tea. And then we will get straight on to the questions for the evening. So the first one I've got here is a pre-submitted question before tonight. It's from Terry, who lives in Mansfield, who asks, there is continuous drug-related crime where we live. Drug dealing on Westfield Lane can be seen in broad daylight. Today, 2 young lads on passing bikes handed money over to get drugs. So what are you doing about it? Can I put that question to you, Commissioner Henry?
Drugs are a real issue in our society, and there's no simple answer. I recognise the impact this issue has on the individuals and commuters, and my plan is actually going to have a really big focus on tackling drugs. In my manifesto, I committed to tackling drug dealing, and I'm absolutely going to honour this pledge. So if you think about my priorities of preventing, responding and supporting, preventing, I want to stop people from getting involved with drugs in the first place, and actually having some really bold conversations and lots of more education in schools. We already fund a programme called DARE, which goes into schools, but I know there's more to be done. So from the preventing point of view, there's a lot more conversations to be had there, and that will feature in my plan. Responding, you've got a very proactive Operation Reach team in Mansfield, and they are absolutely cracking down. They're having, I think it's about two warrants a week at the moment, and really are. The drug dealer hates to see those black bonnets going around, and I'm delighted when I see them going around because they've been really effective in tackling. but also supporting. I think we need to remember that a lot of people who get involved with drugs are very vulnerable, and some of them don't want to be involved with drugs and want to get off drugs. So we need to put support in place for people who do enter the system for the first time to get off drugs if they need to. So I'm really keen to do that too. But from an operational point of view, if I could pass over to Inspector Nick Butler, so you can say what's happening on the ground in Mansfield as we absolutely crack down on those drug dealers.
Yes, drugs is a problem in Mansfield, as it quite often is in other areas. We have lots of different types of drugs that are used within the town, ranging from cannabis to cocaine, and the people that are using drugs are varied as well. So that could be somebody very, very young who's been exploited. It could be somebody that's forced to grow cannabis in their house against their will, or it could be someone that's perhaps using cocaine in the nighttime economy and not thinking about the ethical concerns of how it gets to them. But ultimately, the fight against drugs starts with the community. It's about you really coming to us and telling us what's happening. I know it can feel quite frightening to contact the police, but I would really encourage you to use the channels that are there. 101 obviously is the key number to contact us on. But if you are concerned and you want to pass us information, you don't want to ring 101, then obviously Crime Stoppers 0800 555 111 is really important. And every day we get the information from Crime Stoppers that's been rung through or emailed through, and that's completely anonymous. As the Commissioner says, we act on that intelligence, and our Operation Reacher team, our knife crime team, our neighbourhood policing teams, to name but a few, will turn that information where possible into a warrant issued by the magistrates, and we will do those early morning knocks, those late night knocks, and we'll go into properties and we'll really get to the bottom of what's happened. It's not just about locking somebody up, as the Commissioner says, it's about making sure that people, where they're willing, get access to support. We've got some great partnership relationships in Mansfield, Care, Grow, Live. We have actual medical practitioners within our custody suites when people get arrested that make the assessment. So there's a great wraparound support for anybody that really wants to make a change. But for those that don't, and those that want to commit crime and exploit people, we're there for them too in a slightly different way, as we've said with Reacher, with the proactive operations. And I make no excuses for the fact that we do, at least 2 of these warrants sort of every week, and we are arresting more people than ever before for these kind of offences. So, as I say, please feel confident in contacting us, but there are lots of different ways you can do that.
Thanks very much, Inspector Butler. I can say I've been out and met the Reacher team in the town centre and talked through some of their work, and it really is impactful. I think the visibility of that in the town centre as well in recent weeks has been fantastic to see. I don't know if you want to touch on while we're here, because you mentioned a few things there. We've been talking about previously around that kind of county lines, drugs issue, and also you mentioned there, the idea of growing cannabis in your house against your will. That kind of, people might not be aware of that phenomenon, kind of cuckooing and that exploitation. I wonder if you'd touch on that for us a little bit.
Yeah, obviously, criminal gangs organise themselves and they make substantial quantities of money from dealing drugs, and cannabis is one of those drugs that people can grow with the right equipment, as we all know, in their own homes. But what tends to happen is these gangs will exploit people that are perhaps living in a property that's suitable for this, a little bit out of the way, and it can, if we're not careful, it can go under the radar. So it's really important that people are vigilant. The smell from cannabis when it's growing is really significant. You can't mistake it, and that's the time to give us a call. And even if there's a smell in your area and you can't pinpoint it to an address, then just let us know and we can do the work that's involved in that. And then, as Mr. Bradley says, around county lines, that's something that not everybody really understands. It's not a phrase that has been commonly used up until recently, but that's the exploitation of particularly young people, often as young as 11 and 12, that are used to move drugs around, not just the county, but about regions on trains, buses. And again, they can just look like young people going about the business on their bicycles or on the buses. So there's lots of ways that this happens, but there's a huge amount of hidden harm with drugs in the supply and distribution chain. And it's not as simple as us just locking people up that are smoking it, using it, or dealing it on the street. We've got to really understand it, that complex network that sits behind it.
Thanks, Inspector Butler. A lot of people often ask, why should I report that stuff when you don't go and arrest the guy who's smoking it on the corner? Obviously, there's bigger fish to fry from your perspective in terms of going and finding people. And we'll move on to the next question for Commissioner Henry. So Stephen Mormon has asked, why are there no cameras on Portland Road? It's a racetrack, Commissioner Henry. Lost you there. I think the sound just drops out there a little bit, so hopefully we'll get you back. Inspector Butler's there. You want to talk to us about speeding, Inspector Butler?
Yes, of course. So when we do the surveys in Mansfield through the Commissioner's office, or we do our own surveys through Facebook, without fail, in the top three, we always get told that speeding is a problem in Mansfield. And if you walk, around the streets of Mansfield and you notice cars going excessively fast in your area, then you realise that the harm that can happen. And we have got, vulnerable people in society, young people that are crossing the roads, and it's very, very easy for someone to speed and harm somebody, or even worse. It tends to be focused on certain arterial routes where people are taking cuts throughs, but we know about that from the feedback we get from you. So each week, officers go out with the, people call them locally speed guns, but a device that measures people's speed, and will target areas where the community have got concerns. And we put that on Facebook into the local media so people know that we're doing it. And then the comments that come after that underneath tend to inform us about where we've got to go next after that. We call it Fatal 4 operations because that's the 4 statistically most likely reasons that people get seriously injured on our roads, being not wearing a seatbelt, using a mobile phone, drink or drug driving, and obviously excess speed. Talking about that specific area, I think the person probably means Portland Street, although can't guarantee that because there isn't Portland Road as far as I'm aware. But if that person does mean Portland Street, then the town centre and that area is somewhere where we have been doing these Fatal 4 operations. But obviously a speed camera, a static speed camera, can't go on every single street. But we have got a network of cameras throughout the county where the data shows us that they are the most risky places, and that's something that County Council really understand and work with us to understand. So yeah, absolutely a priority for the local police. We understand your concerns. It needs to happen. When somebody is stopped for speeding, then there are various different outcomes for that. It won't necessarily mean that person goes to court. It won't even necessarily mean that person gets points on their licenses. We do speed awareness courses, but obviously if someone does this regularly or it is really, really over the limit, then court is potentially an option.
Thank you very much. I don't know if you've got Commissioner Henry back. If she sounds back on, that's great. Perfect. So I don't know if you've got anything to add to that one, Commissioner Henry, or we can move on to the next one.
I'm happy to move on.
Carrying on. So the next one, Patrick Bush asks, why are there no police visible in the town centre? Surely this would deter crime. I'll throw in for starters, I've never seen so many coppers in the town centre as I've had over the last few months, but I don't know what you make of that one.
Yeah. I also know there's a lot more police in the town centre now than there was before, but actually people want visibility of police officers. I do measure how visible they feel police officers are, and actually in Mansfield only 34% of people are happy with the visibility of police officers. It's slightly higher across the county and other areas. You do have more police officers than you did before. The Safer Streets funding helped that, and we've got more patrols happening too. But if we go over to Chief Inspector Butler, from an operational view, I want more police and safer streets, and I want to make sure you get your fair share of Mansfield.
Thanks, Commissioner. I totally understand that point of view from Patrick regarding his concerns that he doesn't see police officers in the town centre. When I came to Mansfield, I think it was 2015, we didn't have a dedicated town centre team, and that was one of the first things that I did do in response to the Mamba use and people feeling intimidated by the street drinking and the Mamba use. So we've now got a designated team, Sergeant Lee leading that team of PCs, PCSOs. We also get the support of the wardens, and we get support from different teams from the wider police family. So, for example, the nighttime economy at Mansfield, Friday, Saturday night, where it's really busy, and we know that when people have had too much to drink, there can be fights that break out. We bring in officers from all around Nottinghamshire to support us with that, and we have a sergeant leading a number of police officers in high visibility uniforms in those key areas, Clumber Street, the marketplace, and we do that every Friday and Saturday night. During the day, I do everything I can to maximise visibility of police officers by using the Reacher team, by using our response team. I think it's important to say again, when I arrived in 2015, the number of officers that we had on the response teams wasn't as good as it is now. It's roughly double the number of police officers on the response teams. And although their primary function is to get to the 999 calls, when you call them to say someone's breaking into your house or there's an assault taking place, in between those calls, we have a tasking system, and I speak with them in the morning when I arrive at work, and they will be in that marketplace, parked up, parking their vehicles up, having a walking around, and then again on the nighttime economy at the key times, they will also go into the town centre. We've got plainclothes operations taking place to target the shoplifters that come into the town, often from outside the area. And we're using a whole mixture of tools and powers, criminal behaviour orders, to actually ban persistent offenders from that town centre. And we've got more CBOs, criminal behaviour orders, from Mansfield Town Centre than most other areas. I've had numerous conversations about that, and I'm really proud to say that for the persistent offenders, we've said to them, you have no right to come into this area and do what you're doing, and they've actually been banned from that area. So we have seen huge improvements. We've seen huge improvements around the rough sleeper, people in doorways, a huge amount of support's taken place to get them into housing, so that's reduced. But the visibility, we need to use every opportunity we've got to try and maximise that, even if we share, a space with different partners within the town centre, for example, within the town hall or within the bid. We'll actually spend time with them rather than coming back to the station to maximise that. But as the Commissioner says, and it's great to hear, obviously, the more officers that we can get to support that function is greatly appreciated.
Thanks, Inspector. We've also got Chief Inspector O'Neill on the call. I don't know if you've got anything to add to that one, Chief Inspector. Obviously, it's been very different policing in the town sector and different responsibilities over the last 18 months, I'd imagine, as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you very much, Mr. Bradley, for that. And thank you, Patrick, for raising that question as well. So I'm a local resident, and I'm passionate about ensuring we get the best use out of our staff, our available staff in Mansfield District as well. What we need to do is obviously deploy our resources according to threat, risk and harm. So we will find that naturally in some areas staff will be far more visible than others at times, but that's a natural consequence of deploying our staff that way. All of our neighbourhood teams are co-located with response teams and CID teams across the area as well. And this ensures that information is shared between all officers who work in local policing, and it enables us to focus on those priority areas properly. We've made a number of significant resourcing decisions over the past few years, as you mentioned, and we're in a much improved position in relation to our local policing capacity and capability. So in April this year, we had 2,224 police officers, which is the highest number we've had in the past 10 years. So a real achievement. We've also seen a significant increase in neighbourhood policing establishment force-wide as well. So we've actually grown our neighbourhood policing contingent by 109 officers since 2018. We've added 38 PCs into our neighbourhood teams, and we've added 5 sergeants and 68 PCs into the Operation Reacher teams across the force. All in all, it paints a slightly different picture. We have got the resources available, and we are deploying them daily in Mansfield. I know the Commissioner's already mentioned Operation Reacher, and we tend to keep mentioning the same operation, but it's had a massive effect since it was introduced. And in the first 6 months, it led to 1,000 arrests, 200 warrants, 400 searches, 300 vehicles being seized, £200,000 in cash being seized, and over 200 weapons seized across the force. So a massive impact. So thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's been really impactful. I've certainly noticed the difference in the communications around Reacher as well from Nottinghamshire Police, which has been great. On to the next one. So Clara from Warsop asks, there are lots of problems with motorbikes and quad bikes around Warsop with no helmets, speeding and scaring people. Do the police intend to deal with it? I know that's a really challenging one to deal with, Commissioner Henry.
It is challenging, but I've had a lot of correspondence about this because it really worries people. I mean, there's people putting themselves at risk, speeding where they shouldn't be speeding on motorbikes with no helmets, and they can get themselves into such bother. I mean, I spoke to Chief Inspector Heather Sutton, and she told me a horror story of how she had to pull somebody out of their chains on their bike because they'd got themselves into a pickle because they were somewhere where they shouldn't be, doing something they shouldn't have been. There are places you can use bikes and legally, but I'm worried how many people are using them where they shouldn't be. And if you see people where they shouldn't be on a quad bike or on an off-road motorbike, please report it. We do actually have our own off-road bike team to catch people where they shouldn't be, and we also use technology of we get the drone to go up. But please report it, and if you can do it safely, take a picture, get as much details as you can. But if I pass across to Inspector Butler to talk more about operationally what they're doing to stop this and try and keep people safe and not disturbed by these, and also the damage as well. These quad bikes cause massive damage as they go through farmers' fields.
Thank you. Yeah, so I mean, broadly speaking, when people are on the road and they're not insured and they aren't wearing helmets, they commit offences, and we will enforce that, and we'll stop them, we'll prosecute them, and we'll often seize lots of motorcycles that are being used in that way under the powers that we've got. I think it is important to say that in some of the areas where off-road vehicles are used, there is wildlife there, and I know that isn't something that everybody understands, but we've got a huge amount of wildlife that gets injured, harmed, damaged. We have people on horses that get frightened, and that can be really, really serious and lead to serious injury. And then obviously the people on the motorcycles themselves get injured, and that's really sad when that happens. And that has happened a few times in Mansfield, and it's really tragic when you speak with the families and you hear what's happened and the loss there. So it is a serious issue, absolutely. So in Warsop, we've actually got police officers and PCSOs based in Warsop, and I was over there just a couple of weeks ago at a public meeting to listen to some of the concerns. It did come up again there. We've got a dedicated off-road motorcycle team that's made up of officers from around Nottinghamshire, who are all trained, and they take it in turns to fulfil that function. And we use them regularly in Mansfield, particularly on Operation Nebraska, which is the desert area off Eakring Road and all the areas that feed into that. We've got drones, we've got cameras that we use lots of different technologies to find out who's doing this, because obviously what we don't want to end in situations where somebody's being pursued on the road, because that's really risky. One of the things that we sometimes forget is that somebody somewhere is buying these motorcycles, and when it's young people, parents can be aware that this is happening. And I'd really ask parents just to take that responsibility and make sure that your son, daughter isn't going out on these motorcycles. And if you're a resident where you know that somebody is storing one of these motorcycles in their garage, then again, it might be something that you wouldn't think of telling us about. But again, you can use the Crime Stoppers number, the 0800 555 111. Just let us know if somebody's using a quad bike or a motorcycle in a way that you think is dangerous, and we'll do the rest. It might be that they're on a quad bike, it's all legal, and they don't need a helmet, for example. That's what the legislation says in that specific case. But just let us know, and then we can make the inquiries and deal with people when they're not actually on the road, maybe at home.
Thanks, Inspector Butler. Chief Inspector O'Neill, I don't know if you can tell us a little bit more about these off-road teams, because I understand it's really challenging to deploy them, right? Because you've got to be in the right place at the right time. So from the conversations I've had before, the importance of that intelligence and where people tend to be and when is really important in how we put those out and how we deploy those teams. Is that right?
Sorry, problems with my mute button. Absolutely, yeah. So I think the Commissioner's already said what's really important to us is that if people see something, they say something. So if you're out and about and you see something happening, just tell us about it. So where are the bikes coming from? Are they being dropped off in vans? If so, please pass details of the vans, etc. You know, we need every minute bit of detail. So full descriptions of bikes, of clothing, you know, colours of helmets, pictures, as the Commissioner's already said. If we get pictures or videos and get them sent in, that's really important. All this information can be passed on to the dedicated beat team, which is obviously on our website, and can be reported anonymously as well through Crime Stoppers to try and build that picture. All the off-road issues are then tackled by our Force off-road team. They're obviously a team of highly trained professional riders. We've got 16 currently trained in Force. We've got a fleet of really well-maintained off-road motorcycles, and they'll get deployed as and where we need to deploy them. So they will go out and patrol the areas, offer reassurance to anybody who's law-abiding. They'll deter and then, where possible, prosecute offenders as well. Most of the bikes are then, at the time, is seized under Section 165 of the Road Traffic Act, because the bikes themselves are really registered. Most then get disposed of, and the offenders never get them back. So what happens is, myself and one of my colleagues, Chief Inspector Sutton, who's already been mentioned, we review bids from all the local areas every 2 weeks, and then we decide where those teams are going to be deployed. So it's really important that we get to find out those local issues, and then we can deploy the team into that area accordingly. Finally, just to pick up on what the Commissioner said, there is a list of practice motocross tracks that the public can lawfully use their bikes as long as they comply with regulations, and that's available on our website as well.
Thanks, that's really helpful. I repeat what Inspector Butler said. You know, it's really frustrating when people say, you know, why can't you come out and catch these guys? You need that intelligence. Why can't you seize the bikes? When, you know, there must be family, parents, neighbours who know where these things are. And if we can find out where they are, we can go and get them. So we'll reiterate that, make sure we do report that information. The next one, Commissioner Henry, is back to the town centre and the marketplace. Joe in Forest Town says, the marketplace is full of people drinking, taking drugs and causing trouble. What is being done about it?
Okay, well, lots is being done about it, because we want Mansfield to be that welcoming, vibrant place where people come to enjoy themselves. And absolutely, this antisocial behaviour needs to be tackled. But it's a joint response as well, which is, you know, the police and the council and, you know, working together. And we have been doing a lot. I know there's more to be done. Antisocial behaviour is a top priority for your neighbourhood policing team, and they're working with the council and wider partners, and including youth services as well, in order to deal with it. Also, there's a new designing out crime officer who sits within the neighbourhood hub, and it's evidence-based assessment to design out the problem, and this is ongoing. There's also something called Operation Animism. No idea where that word came from, but that's Friday and Saturday nights. And these are targeted patrols with the council, and Inspector Butler can say a little bit more about that. But absolutely, we need to tackle antisocial behaviour, and if you see it, please call it in.
Right. Have we got Inspector Butler there somewhere? There is.
I know we've spoken about it already, about the town centre and the work that we're doing to sort of increase visibility. But in addition to that, a couple of other points. When we decide what the priorities are for Mansfield in terms of policing priorities with our partners, we look at that survey data and we have a conversation. And at the moment, the marketplace and those surrounding areas is one of the 3 top priorities for Mansfield, and Operation Amber Stag reflects that. I'm also leading and the chair for the problem-solving group of the town centre, which is made up of many partners from the commercial sector, from the local authority, the business improvement district. Lots of people come to that meeting, and we've broken it down into themes. Some of that is about designing out, as the Commissioner says, designing out issues. So if there's something that a bit of technology or removing something or moving something might help with, then we actually do that through the recommendations of the designing out crime officer. But there are lots of ways in which we're tackling these problems, whether it's about support, whether somebody presents as a rough sleeper and getting them into access into support at a very early stage, or whether it's actually using community penalty notices, the PSPO powers that we've got there. The Public Spaces Protection Order allows us to fine people for certain types of behaviour, like drinking in a public place, street drinking as people term it. And we use dispersal powers as well. I've got the power to use a certain part of an act where I can actually say there's antisocial behaviour in this particular part of the town at this time, and we can actually ask people to leave, tell them to leave, and if they don't leave, then they can be liable to arrest, and that does happen. We sometimes follow that up with additional powers, injunctions, or criminal behaviour orders. So lots and lots is being done. But I know myself, my mum walks into town most days and she'll say, I've not seen a police officer, and I'll say, I don't know why, because I know at least 6 have gone out the back door and I've watched them into town. But sometimes we don't always see the police officers because they might be dealing with somebody, you know, down a back street or out of the way. The Safer Streets funding from the Home Office has been an absolute essential part of our work. It's given over £400,000 worth of funding to do some real targeted work in the town centre around that area, with offenders, supporting victims as well. And I'm going to speak about that a little bit later. So there's a huge amount of effort that is going into the town centre. I'm a resident. I'm really proud of Mansfield. I don't like to hear when people go into the town centre that they feel it doesn't feel safe, or to see people drinking or using drugs. It really upsets me to hear that. I know the officers feel exactly the same, because they do some absolutely amazing work in the town centre. They go above and beyond on a regular basis. So yeah, the work is ongoing. I know there are still issues. We are trying our absolute best, but as Chief Inspector O'Neill said earlier, we do have competing demands, and there are priorities in other parts of Mansfield, which I'm sure we'll talk about. So we've just got to balance those resources and make the absolute best use of them that we can. Thank you.
Thanks, Inspector Buller. We're saying, I think we go back to somewhere of 2018 when kind of Mamba and Spice was at the height of where it was, and town centre sometimes really awful at that stage, and we've all had that experience. I think I've found it much better in recent years, I have to say, and certainly obviously different times in COVID, hasn't it been, you know, in terms of people going out and the role of the police as well, but I certainly haven't seen that level of issue in the town centre. Worth adding as well, I think, if you'll bear with me, about some of the work that's been going on to try and improve the town centre more widely. Is obviously a crime element, but that designing out crime bit will be really important when it comes to our town centre investments, the town's fund work, you know, some of the green spaces we're creating, moving public services into the town centre, you know, all of that work to make sure we're not accidentally creating, you know, skate parks or dark alleys and blind spots that could cause us problems. So that will be hugely important in terms of investment and that work to improve the town centre going forward as well, I'm sure. Right, next one. So Sue in Mansfield Woodhouse asks about e-scooters. She says these e-scooters are a menace. Kids ride on the pavement and on the road without helmets, no consideration for pedestrians. What are you doing?
Okay, thank you. I think people need to remember that the only e-scooters that can be used on public roads are those actually rented as part of government-backed trials, and that's not happening in Mansfield. So if you own an e-scooter, you can only use it on private land and not on public roads, and that includes not obviously not being used on pavements. They're covered by the same laws that govern the use of cars and motor vehicles, so the police can enforce dangerous driving, and it needs to be reported, and we need to be keeping people safe. If I hand over to Inspector Butler to comment on this on an operational view.
Yeah, thank you. I understand the attraction of e-scooters. It's a technology that's now become affordable. I see them advertised on the internet myself. I can understand the appeal, but as the Commissioner says, you are committing an offence if you're using them on the road or the pavement, and we will take action, we will seize them and we will prosecute you. And there are occasions now where people have actually been prosecuted for using them whilst they're unfit through drinking alcohol. So that can be something that happens as well. We do seize them, we do prosecute people. It will become more and more obvious as we cover this on social media and in the media, because there are a number of cases that are going through the court at the moment. They are quite quick. They're often seen on the pavement, and when someone's travelling, not wearing any protective equipment, not particularly visible, that's when serious accidents, collisions can take place. So let's not underestimate the danger they pose to pedestrians in particular. And let's, as parents and as people within the community, let's take responsibility for that and just make sure we're really clear that this shouldn't be happening.
Thanks very much, Inspector Butler. Les in the chat has asked about illegal immigration, which has got nothing whatsoever to do with Nottinghamshire Police. So I'll come back to him on that one if he wants to drop me an email. I'm sure I can help him with that one at some stage. On to the next one on here. What are the police doing to reduce burglary in the area? That's from Keith in Ladybook.
Thank you for asking that, Keith. Burglary is regularly raised as an issue of high concern, and I understand that, because you want to feel as safe as possible in your home, and it's devastating when burglary happens, which is why I was so delighted to get that £432,000 for Safer Streets. And part of that money has been used to fund a burglary reduction officer, really great officer, Megan Tuffley, and she's already visited over 111 properties to provide advice. We call it target hardening, to make those properties more secure. And the inspector can talk a little bit more about that. But also, as part of the Safer Streets funding, we actually put a series of new and fixed 4G CCTV cameras around hotspots, and also ANPR technology. Now, I'm really keen on making our roads as hostile to criminals as possible. I want to ring a steel around Nottinghamshire, and I want to get as much ANPR in as I can. And we know that will keep residents safe. Cash has also been set aside to improve street lighting, and actually, that also, as well as making people feel safe when they have better street lighting, absolutely deters burglars. So we are doing more to stop burglaries happening in Mansfield. But if I pass over to Inspector Nick Butler for a little bit more of this, it'd be really helpful.
Yeah, thank you. I agree. I think burglary is one of the most upsetting crimes that you can suffer. It really does unnerve everybody. I've been to homes where children have come home and found they've been burgled and they can't sleep at night. Adults the same. It really is a devastating effect, and people work really, really hard for what they've got, and to have it taken from them that way is really, really upsetting. It's upsetting for me to hear about a burglary taking place. There are a number of things that we can do to make it harder for a burglar. And burglars will take the path of least resistance. So if you do what you can, then obviously you're minimising your chances of being burgled. But not everybody knows what to do to keep their home safe. So we've got some experts in this field. And if you do want to come to us and ask for us to come out and do an assessment of your home, we can do that. I'll ask one of my officers to visit, and we can have a look at what the options are. In the Safer Streets area, which is sort of mainly the Portland, the Woodland, the Sherwood town centre part of Mansfield, some of that funding is going towards technical equipment that we're using, and we can't offer that wider than the town centre through that particular funding. But there may be other options we can give you and advice, and there are certain things that we can suggest. So please come forward and ask us to do that, and we'll gladly do that for you. A couple of years ago, I went through the data for Mansfield for burglary, house burglary, and it was out of line with other similar areas, and we got a disproportionate number of particularly house burglaries. and I put together what we called our burglary reduction plan, and that had lots of different streams, lots of different themes within it about how we can prevent burglary. So one of them was, let's make sure we're in the right area at the right time when we know that the burglaries are happening. So analysis was critical around that, and some great analysts have helped us to understand where the burglaries are happening and why they're happening. Getting advice to people about how to keep their home safe, and that great work that Megan does and many other people is really important. We're finding more and more people have got their own CCTV, their own doorbell cameras. They really do work. You know, we're getting that kind of footage through every day now. It's helping us catch people. So please consider that. It is a very effective way of getting CCTV into your home and helping us catch people. We even had the Special Constabulary. They set up their burglary enforcement team, and they came out on regular nights through the year to patrol hotspot areas and visit actual offenders that were on bail, and we were making sure that they were adhering to their bail conditions. So I know we've got limited time, but it's something that I'm really proud of, because at the end of all of that, we just found out at the end of September 2021 that burglary's gone down by just over 47% in Mansfield. No other areas have seen that kind of reduction. It's booking certain trends elsewhere, and I'm really proud of that work, because I know it's not a coincidence. You know, this is something that we've worked really hard, and it remains a priority. And with all the other things that the Commissioner spoke about, ANPR network, the CCTV cameras, all that target hardening, as we call it, when we go to a house and make it safer, it really is working. But again, keep the information coming, because if anybody's selling things, it still happens out there. People are buying stolen goods. We call it market reduction, trying to understand where property is going. If somebody's got something and they shouldn't have it, you know, don't turn a blind eye, because that's someone's property and we've all got a part to play. So again, 101 or Crime Stoppers, please, if somebody is trying to get rid of something in a pub, or someone that you know, or somebody that you've bumped into, please let us know about it.
Thanks, Inspector Butler. Loads of stuff going on in that space, and great stat there about the reduction in burglary. We should try and promote that, and will no doubt make people feel more confident than perhaps they might perceive otherwise. On the subject of theft and burglary, so the next question is from Mel in Rainworth, whichever way you want to go with that. I won't get into that conversation because we'll get in trouble. She says, there's a lot of theft from farms and businesses where I live. The police never seem to catch anybody. I heard there were more police, but I haven't seen any difference. What do you make of that, Commissioner Henry?
Yeah. Well, I'm sorry, Mel, if you feel that police don't seem to catch anybody. So I think you've just heard the stats. 47% reduction in burglary. So, it's a lot of work being done. I think there is a gap in confidence, though, in our rural communities. I've been very vocal, and I've been speaking with the Chief Constable about having a better offer for our rural communities. I think that's really important, and I've got a plea to our rural communities, particularly our farmers, who I've been spending a lot of time with. If something happens, please report it. Only recently, I was with a farmer who'd had a quad bike go through his land, loads of criminal damage, but didn't think about reporting it. We need to know what's happening, because there'll be a reason that quad bike was going through to do that, and we need you to report, and please have the trust in the police that they will come out to rural incidents. If I could pass over to Inspector Nick Butler just for a little bit more on this.
Yeah, so rural crime does cost people hundreds of thousands of pounds every year. I know that. Plant equipment is going. Often organised crime gangs will take this equipment, and when somebody's organised and they're coming in numbers, then it really is frightening. So, to have a rural crime team and be able to target those key areas is really important. And our officers in Mansfield, our neighbourhood officers, have patrol plans, and where we see patterns emerging, where we know we've got activity and intelligence, and we will do our best to target those areas as well. Often these things are happening at night time, so it does feel quite frightening for people. We probably need to do a little bit more, I think, as a police service, in explaining what we're doing to tackle rural crime, and particularly in Mansfield, because we have got a number of overlapping areas, such as Rainworth, Bidworth, and different areas. So that's something that I'll take as feedback, if I may, just make sure that we really feedback on that. I don't know whether Chief Inspector O'Neill wants to comment on a bit more what the wider perspective, perhaps.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for the question, Mel, as well. As already mentioned, we've seen significant increase in our police numbers in recent years. Rural crime issues are so important to us in Notts Police, but as Nick has already said, there's always room to improve our response. As a force, we actually chair the East Midlands Regional Enforcement Group, ensuring that we're connected and able to influence national debate and decision making in respect of rural crime. We've undertaken some training recently in force to address any knowledge gaps and perhaps some misconceptions as well about the severity and impact of rural crime. So we've trained people in the control room and our frontline staff. On the whole, feedback from the community members in general is that we continue to be more responsive to calls for service with rural crime issues, so that's pleasing. We've recently obviously had recruitment drive through Operation Uplift, and that provides an opportunity to educate the new and incoming frontline staff on rural crime issues. So that's an opportunity for us. We can train them as part of their basic training when they join the police. We've recently developed a rural crime toolkit as well. That's been updated very recently indeed, and is available to all officers on their work phones as well and on their laptops. This is just a really simple guide that talks officers through the legislation and gives them some options for dealing with offences, as well as listing all the trained wildlife officers we've got in force as well. We've recently trained another 5 wildlife officers and rural crime officers in March. That brings the total up to about 21 that we've got. They've had some nationally accredited training. And I think, as previously mentioned, we've got the off-road team as well, which helps with our rural crime. So 16 officers trained there. They help with all the police in operations, Nebraska and Jericho. Okay.
Thank you very much. So on to the next one. No doubt we'll come back to rural crime because it's a topic of much conversation. But the next one is short and sweet from Akil in Forest Town. And I know, Commissioner Henry, you've got plenty to say on this one because I've seen some good announcements in the last few months. But Akil asks, what money has been put into the area?
Oh, I've got a list of this because I put loads in. I've been really busy making sure you get plenty in Mansfield. So, over £86,000 as part of the Safe in Nottinghamshire Board. So we've got the Switch Up project. Now this is really exciting. It's for mentors to work with vulnerable people across Mansfield. And it links them to support and engages them in more positive outcomes. It's really important. I'm passionate doing that preventative work. Let's engage with people. Let's make sure they don't go down the wrong path. And actually, it's similar work that we do with something called Red Thread. They're based at Kingsmill Hospital. Unfortunately, if somebody comes in with a knife wound or something that risk of injury from knife crime, it's intervention. It's a teachable moment, and Red Thread are doing some really exciting work. Also, £34,000 for a youth intervention programme, providing youth programme partnership coordinator to support intervention programmes for complex young people. And this actually is working with 10 to 14-year-olds who are, and some of these people are being really targeted by the county line people who are just, go for vulnerable young people, and we're giving those young people other options. I've also, worked really hard to get that £432,000 worth of Safe Streets funding. I shall always be looking for any opportunity to get funding to put more resources into Mansfield to make sure that those streets are safer and that you feel safer.
Everyone has to do it in a meeting, don't they? It's me this time. I was still muted. My bad. I was just saying what marvellous it is, Commissioner Henry, all the additional announcements and support we've seen over the last few weeks, not to mention the increase in police numbers over the last few years as well, which I know it's having a huge impact from the figures we've already heard. It's fantastic. So long may that continue. Been pointed out to me, not only have I muted myself and left myself on, but I've missed a question. So I'm going to go dive back into one of our pre-submitted ones that came in a little bit earlier from Katerina in Mansfield Woodhouse, who was asking about pet theft. And it's been in the news a lot. We've been talking about this in Westminster as well, so I know it's of interest to a lot of people. She says, I've heard a lot recently in the press about pet theft. Is this particularly a problem in Nottinghamshire?
Thank you for asking this question, Katrina. It was really important to me that I looked at the data on this, and actually in Nottinghamshire Police, a pet theft lead had been appointed, Chief Inspector Amy Stow-Jones. So I've had some really interesting conversations with her, and actually looking at the numbers, it's not a big problem in Nottinghamshire, which I'm delighted to say. The numbers have not increased over the last few years. I think it's just when you do see a dog's been stolen, we'll love our dogs so much, it gets shared widely on social media and people do panic. But statistically, the numbers haven't gone up that much. And when you look at the numbers as well, and we're talking tens, not hundreds, often it's actually more of a domestic argument. What happens is that a couple split up, one of them claims the dog's theirs, the other one claims the dog was bought for them as a gift, and they argue who owns this dog. So it's not really a pet theft, it's just claiming that the dog's mine. Or sometimes kids perhaps lose the dog and claim it's been stolen. There's actually more when you dig into it, but unfortunately there are some horrible people out there that do steal dogs. And actually I'm really delighted, Ben, that the work you're doing in Parliament to make sure that pet theft can be tackled differently from a legal point of view. You make the laws, I just work with the police to make sure when those laws are in place that we can use them. So if you'd like to add anything on that, Ben, with regard to the pet theft stuff that's going through Parliament?
Yeah, well, hugely emotive issue for people, as you've said, and one that's had a lot of national profile. I know it's one of those things that, as you said, people feel very strongly about. And my colleague in Ashfield, Lee Anderson MP, has been really vocal about this and particularly working on that in Parliament, because I know he's had a couple of incidents in Ashfield specifically. So it's in train, shall I say. It looks really positive in terms of the additional sentencing, basically making sure pets are treated as our pets and as sentient beings with emotions, as opposed to property, which I think is really important definition and difference. So hopefully over the coming months, that will be available for officers to be able to sentence more strongly because of that. So good move, I think, from that point of view. We'll go on then, shall we, into, we're back to rural crime. So there's a couple of questions here, one from Steve in Warsaw and one from Laura in Clipston. I'm going to shove them together because they're very similar. Steve asks, what are you doing about crime in rural areas? Laura asks, what about police numbers specifically in rural areas and what we're doing to increase those numbers?
Okay. Well, I'm having lots of conversations with the Chief Constable about what we can do more in our rural areas. It's actually really interesting. With regard to rural crime, I want to measure it better. Rural crime specifically, such as issues as fly tipping, machinery theft, trespass, wildlife crime, we still don't have a clear and consistent way of measuring them. So when I'm launching my new policing crime plan, I'm going to make sure we've got a performance framework that's underneath that to ensure that we're really regularly tracking what is really happening. But I've got a real appeal here in rural areas. Please report crime if it's happening. I know we've got to build the confidence with our rural community, and we need to know what's happening. So please report it. 101 999 Crime Stoppers if you want to do it anonymously. But I'm keen to do more in our rural areas. Also, one more appeal. Please fill in my police and crime survey as well, so I can understand what issues are affecting you in your areas. Okay.
Fab, thank you very much. We're going to come to, well, I think it's probably the final one from a time perspective. There's one here in the chat, and I'll leave it up to you, Commissioner, whether you want to hand it over to, it might be an Inspector Butler one. But Road Laws, I assume not a real name, has asked in the chat, they've taken over a business premise. It's popped up there on the screen, and felt very threatened by the level of antisocial behaviour. Wondering if there's any specific support for town centre businesses.
It's okay to pass that across to you, Inspector. We're talking about the bid as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Thanks for putting the question up there. I think it's really, really important. I know it's not easy as a business in the town centre. I know there are a lot of challenges out there at the moment, but there's some great businesses in the town centre. Absolutely have our support. It sounds to me as though we probably haven't had that conversation with you yet, so apologies if that hasn't happened. If there's any way of getting your details to me in an appropriate way, I will make personal contact with you, and we can talk about what we can do. But there's a huge amount of things that are already happening. Some things I think we probably need to explain and talk through. But I think if you get to know the local team, you get to know ourselves, we can bring you into the loop about what we're doing, and then we can look at the specific problems you've got, because it might be that it's happening at the rear of your premises, for example, when staff are coming in and out. It might be when you're opening up in the morning that you feel intimidated. There might be certain times or certain things that are happening. So I think it has to start really with a conversation, just so we can understand what it is that you're experiencing, because that is personal for your business. We will give you that support, but can we just start with having a chat about it, please, and we can understand it better then.
Really helpful, Inspector Butler. I don't know who Road Laws is in real life, whether we know them or not, but if they wanted to drop me an email, I'm sure I could hook you up with Inspector Butler for that conversation.
Thank you.
That might well work. So I think we're running out of time. We're on 8 o'clock. I'm hugely grateful for everybody's time, Chief Inspector O'Neill, Inspector Butler, and you, Commissioner Henry. I don't know if you've got any final thoughts before we wrap up.
Well, I just want to say a huge thank you to everybody joining me this evening, either online. Particularly thank you to you, Ben, our MP, Ben Bradley, Chief Inspector O'Neill and Inspector Butler. It's the start of a conversation. I'm here, I'm listening. Please fill in my police and crime survey. And contact me directly if you think of anything that you wish you'd raised today, or put it in the chat. So thank you very much for your time. I look forward to working with you to make Nottinghamshire and particularly Mansfield safe.